Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman, and thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, Judge Jackson's historic confirmation to the Supreme Court and what it means for the future of America's criminal legal system. One-on-one with top civil rights attorney Ben Crump and his fight for black lives. Hamilton star Renee Elise Goldsberry in Chicago for a one-night-only concert. She tells us what to expect.
Art is everything. It's in everything that we do.
And a visual artist and teacher with an exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry gives us the last word on black creativity. First off tonight, Judge Brown Jackson will be the first black woman to sit on the Supreme Court. It's a historic moment Jackson herself was able to take in while speaking outside the White House on Friday.
It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. But we've made it.
Judge Jackson watched with President Biden as the Senate voted to confirm her nomination on Thursday. The vote fell mostly along party lines, 53-47, with 3 Republicans joining Democrats in voting in favor. Judge Jackson is set to be sworn in as the 116th Supreme Court Justice sometime this summer when Justice Stephen Breyer steps down. Joining us now with more are Audra Wilson, President and CEO of the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, and Kalia Coleman, former president of the Black Women Lawyers Association of Greater Chicago. Thanks to you both for joining us. Kalia, let's start with you. Judge Jackson's confirmation makes it the first time, as we said, that a black woman will sit on the highest court in the nation, the 233-year-old Supreme Court. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, who led the confirmation process as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he reflected on this momentous occasion and how it'll go down in history. Let's take a look.
In the years to come, long after we've left the Senate, one of our grandchildren may ask where we were on this historic day, April 7th, 2022, when America broke down what seemed like an impossible racial barrier and voted to send the first African-American woman to serve on our highest court. I will be proud to say I was on the Senate floor, standing at my desk and casting my vote with pride for the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Kalia Coleman, why is this moment so monumental?
This moment is so monumental because Justice Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court provides a beacon of hope. As a black woman lawyer, as a member of the Black Women Lawyers Association of Greater Chicago, this is such an inspiring moment. Now we can really say that every young black girl can look to Justice Jackson and know that they too can ascend to the highest court in the land. This moment is so monumental because we are now moving towards and have some reassurance that we are moving towards forming that more perfect union. Now the highest court in the land really reflects the diversity of America, and that is essential when we talk about the justice system. It's a monumental moment because we have Justice Jackson, who will serve as the first federal defender to ever sit on the highest court, a court that oftentimes presides over decisions involving criminal law. She fundamentally understands the criminal process. She understands criminal law, criminal procedure. She will provide a very, very important voice to those discussions as the justices are making deliberations in order to set precedent that will have long-standing impact for years to come.
And to that point, Audra, as we just heard Kalia say, it's the first time that a former defender, a former public defender, sits on the Supreme Court. What does that say about how, our opinion and our impression of public defenders has shifted?
Well, historically, the path to becoming a judge, either the local, state, and federal courts, was to be a prosecutor, or work for a large law firm, or be a litigator for the government. And this would typically leave out former public defenders, civil rights lawyers, and other sorts of attorneys that are working for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and any other organizations that are challenging the government. So having this confirmation is so significant because we see now there is more of a possibility for professional diversity to be represented in the future. And as Kalia also mentioned, with respect to discussions in the criminal legal system, which are front and center nowadays, her time as a public defender will enable her to bring a more nuanced perspective, specifically one from clients. So this is definitely momentous.
Kalia, Jackson's confirmation, it doesn't really change what we know to be so far the conservative leaning of the court, but what kind of impact might she have on cases?
Well, that is true. It doesn't change the conservative majority, but there's a voice that will be present during those discussions that was not present before. And that voice is one, as I previously stated, will be one that comes with different experiences, and hopefully based on her different experiences and unique perspective that she will bring, while it doesn't change the majority ideological composition, hopefully it creates a different level of consideration based on, how she will articulate her views and her perspectives about different issues.
So this fall, the Supreme Court will also hear a challenge to Harvard University's use of race as a factor in admissions. Now, it's a case that could impact affirmative action cases nationwide, and we know that Justice Brown Jackson, she currently serves on Harvard's Board of Overseers, but she testified in Senate hearings that she would recuse herself from that case. Audra, do you think that's the right move?
I do think that's the right move to make. The truth of the matter is that Supreme Court justices typically make their own decisions as to whether to recuse themselves. Federal law requires federal judges to disqualify themselves in any proceeding in which their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. So although she doesn't have to follow that standard, I think it's probably the prudent thing to do.
I mean, this is something, as you just mentioned, that justices have been accused of not doing enough, of policing themselves a little bit more and choosing to recuse themselves when it might be necessary. Should justices be policing themselves more, Audra?
That's a good question, especially in light of what's been happening with the January 6th proceedings and the concern, a major concern about the impartiality of a Supreme Court justice. It would be good to know that there is some other, that we could rely upon justices to be able to recuse themselves or to be clear about when they should be, especially because they've had that sort of flexibility. I certainly understand why that flexibility is in place. But for example, in this case, I hope that if Justice Jackson were to recuse herself in this proceeding, that Justice Thomas would also take it upon himself to recuse himself if, in fact, there are any proceedings that make it to the Supreme Court regarding January 6th.
Kalia, what's your reaction to her recusing from that case potentially? I mean, because then we're talking about an affirmative action case where the black woman on the court she's not casting a vote. She's not providing input on that one.
Well, as Audra mentioned, I do think it's important to preserve the integrity of the system. Judges are expected to be impartial, and as part of that impartiality assessment, when one may have, at least from an outside perspective, may have a vested interest here, Justice Jackson serves on the governing board for Harvard, that could compromise the American public's faith or confidence in the system. So I think a recusal is appropriate. However, I think it's important to note that when the Supreme Court does consider the affirmative action cases, there's another case involving the University of North Carolina that Justice Jackson may be able to weigh in on that case, which hopefully her perspectives with respect to weighing in that case could sort of put the other justices on notice of her position with respect to affirmative action as a whole.
And Kalia, how does well, actually, before we get to that, I want to mention this. Politicians, obviously calling Jackson's confirmation a groundbreaking moment, including Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who had this to say, quote, "Jackson may be the first, but she will certainly not be the last. She will continue to inspire many others who look like her to follow in her footsteps." Kalia, how does this confirmation sort of open the door for lawyers with more varied backgrounds, for example, with a history of being a public defender? How does that open the door for more diversity than we typically see professionally?
I have a quote that really resonates with me. You can't be what you cannot see. I think now Justice Jackson's confirmation of her appointment to the court will encourage others who may have similar career paths to be audacious enough to actually express their interest in serving on the Supreme Court. When before, many folks who were prior federal defenders thought that it was a complete impossibility. Black women lawyers thought it was a complete impossibility. And now those impossibilities are now filled with hope and assurance that you too can also ascend to the highest court in the land.
Audra, we've got just a few seconds left, but, over the years, the Senate SCOTUS confirmation votes have gotten more and more divided. This one, 53-47. 15, 20 seconds. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells us where we are right now in terms of our great political divide. I am happy at least that there were 3 Republicans that did vote confirmation. But we have a lot of work to do, a lot of discussions to have. And really, we have to be thinking very carefully about just the polarization in this country that is now possibly infecting the highest court of the land, where impartiality is key.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Kalia Coleman and Audra Wilson for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, one-on-one with civil rights attorney Ben Crump. Attorney Ben Crump has become a household name, the go-to lawyer for the families of Michael Brown, George Floyd, and Jacob Blake, among so many others. Crump may be the most notable civil rights attorney in the country, spending the last decade taking on high-profile cases of not just police using excessive force, but other violations of civil rights. Despite all of his work, Crump says there is more work to be done, and Benjamin Crump joins us now. Mr. Crump, thank you so much for joining us. I understand that you were able to see something historic this week with regards to the newly confirmed Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Tell us about that.
Yes, it was just riveting for me. I know Ketanji. We teach at Harvard every year for the past 3 years at the Trial Advocacy Program. And one of the things that riveted me, because I'm always used to seeing her very tactical. She talks about procedure. She talks about stare decisis and all these legal maxims. But today at the White House in the Rose Garden, she talked with such passion, and she talked, and using her words, not just metaphorically, but in reality. She said her grandparents were living in segregation. Her parents were raised in segregation. And from segregation to the Supreme Court in one generation. And that just riveted me. And all I could think about was my 9-year-old daughter, Brooklyn, and what this historic day would mean to her. And people all over America who have been traditionally marginalized, but especially Black girls. It was such a special day, and she is going to be such an asset for our nation as we move forward in trying to fulfill the promise of liberty and justice for all.
Now, that was in D.C., of course, but Mr. Crump, you were in Chicago just this past week to call for federal police reform. As we know, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act stalled in the Senate after being approved in the House in March, so a year ago of last year. What type of police reform would you like to see at the federal level?
Well, obviously, we need meaningful police reform that will hopefully slow down some of these hashtags that are happening far too soon. I mean, we have far too many young people of color being killed by the very people who are supposed to protect and serve them. And we haven't had meaningful police reform since President Lyndon Baines Johnson Great Society legislation. We thought after Rodney King was horribly beaten on video, we would get police reform. We didn't get it. Then we thought after Michael Brown and Ferguson, you remember, hands up, don't shoot. They were all talking during the Obama years about meaningful police reform. We didn't get it. And then certainly after we watched the documentary of George Floyd being tortured to death by the police, we knew, we just believed in our heart that finally we were going to get meaningful police reform.
Well, and to that point, Mr. Crump, sorry to jump in, but, you know, as you mentioned, the nation was incensed after witnessing the murder of George Floyd 2 years ago this summer. The Black Lives Matter movement was reignited. Why the stall? Why do you think it hasn't been done, what you would like to see?
As Attorney Ramanujan and I often talked about with the family, partisan politics. We're so polarized in this nation that even common sense legislation like banning chokeholds, like banning No Not Once that led to the death of Breonna Taylor, like having a federal police registry of who the police are killing so we can just keep track of it. They won't even vote on that because they don't want anybody from the other side to get any credit from doing important work, passing important legislation. And so it's really sad in America, but that's why elections matter. We have to fight with everything we have to give our children a better world, a better America. And when we look at what's happening with the John Lewis, right to vote legislation that they continue to try to block, it is for one purpose and one purpose only, I believe, and that is to continue the partisan politics and the gamesmanship.
And Mr. Crump, I've got plenty of questions for you, but I know we've got a limited amount of time. So I want to talk a little bit more about you. You've spent the last decade or so of your career focused on families impacted by police brutality, excessive force, even everyday citizens taking matters into their own hands. What calls you to these cases?
Well, you know, when I was in the fourth grade, growing up in a small town in North Carolina, Lumberton, North Carolina, they bused us fourth grade children across the tracks, literally, to North Lumberton, predominantly white community. And I saw over there they had newer schools, newer facilities, new technology, new books. I mean, it was just astonishing. And I remember distinctly being on the school bus one day, coming home back across the tracks to the black section of town, seeing all the dilapidated buildings, seeing the cars broke down on the side of the road, seeing my former elementary school with its lead paint deteriorating. And I just remember thinking to myself, why on one side of town people have it so good, but on our side of town, people have it so challenging. And my mother told me the reason we got to go to the new school with the better technology and newer books was because of Brown versus Board of Education and a lawyer named Thurgood Marshall. And from that day on, I said, when I grow up, I'm going to become a lawyer like Thurgood Marshall and fight for people in my community and people who look like me to have a better opportunity at achieving the American dream. And from that day to this one, I continue to fight.
And the rest is history. Attorney Benjamin Crump, thank you so much for joining us. That's where we'll have to leave it, but we're honored to have you with us.
It was my honor. Thank you.
And up next, checking in with Broadway star Renee Elise Goldsberry. Stay with us. Broadway star Renee Elise Goldsberry is in Chicago tonight for a one-night-only concert. She's best known for her role as Angelica Schuyler in Hamilton, but she's also starred in other Broadway classics, along with appearing in several movies and TV shows. At tonight's An Evening with Renee Elise Goldsberry at the Auditorium Theater, Goldsberry will perform classic songs from artists like Aretha Franklin, along with her own Broadway hits. She says of all her performances, this one's the most challenging.
I think this is the hardest for sure, in a way, because, you have to be, I think, the most exposed. You have to be the most comfortable with yourself to keep people entertained for that amount of time. It's me. It's not me playing a character. I mean, you get to experience the character when I'm singing the song. But yeah, it's really more just kind of an evening with me. It's what, about 90 minutes of me and the music that I love in these really wonderful arrangements, and a lot of stories of, some moments that I think have been pretty exciting in my life and some pretty humbling and embarrassing ones too. I think it's probably more valuable to hear some of the harder times in people's lives than some of the things that you might know about because you saw it happen on television. But I like to feel like when you've left the theater, you feel like you not only had a really good time, but you spent about an hour and a half and you know me.
Goldsberry began performing these solo concerts in 2017 and says she has no plans of stopping anytime soon. Her next step is to incorporate some of her original music and says to look out for an album set to come out this summer. An exhibit celebrating Black creativity is open right now at the Museum of Science and Industry. The juried art exhibition consists of more than 100 pieces from Black artists around the world. One of them is Shaquille Reed, who's also a visual arts teacher for the Chicago High School for the Arts. She gives us tonight's last word.
I'm Shaquille Reed. I'm a creator. I'm also a teacher at the Chicago High School for the Arts. Art is everything. It's in everything that we do. When you walk outside, there's art there. Somebody created that street sign, right? Somebody created that billboard. They're artists. Whether you recognize it or not, you're an artist. So for me, I walk out in the world and I see art every day. Right now, I am in a show called Black Creativity. It is at the Museum of Science and Industry of Chicago. The work is really heavily rooted in my identity. And I sort of kind of just got into my identity in grad school in a sense that, like, it was sort of a topic of conversation in one of my art classes. And it was just like, hey, so what is your origin story? And I never really thought about my origin story. Like, where am I from? Who am I? I was working with hair, so I kind of came up with things that were really connected to the work that I was making already, but also hair. Like, this is one point of view of my identity. And in the Black community, hair is sort of centered to that. I just remember having conversations at the dinner table. They never were about my identity itself, like you as this Black woman, you as this Native American woman. No, like, I've always talked about my hair. So starting in grad school with hair was sort of my comfort zone too, and sort of the only way I knew how to talk about myself at that moment. And so I was pushing out those hair pieces, and that piece that's in a museum is one of many of the hair pieces that I made then after. The product itself was I call it for the culture product jacket. It had like barrettes, bobos, hair ties, synthetic hair, hair clips, combs, brushes, all of these objects sort of placed inside of them and sewn, right? Within like these thick layers of vinyl. And I was really thinking about archives. A lot of the work that I do too sort of dives a little bit into religion too, and I was thinking about Joseph's coat. All of my work, you're gonna see like undertones of the past things that I've done. I'm really interested in the past. I'm really interested in sort of using material until it's all gone, sort of really just like working through something rather than just skipping past this. It was an art teacher that inspired me. She was the first art teacher of color for me. So it was really just like seeing this Black educated woman who knew everything about art made me interested. As a Black woman too, and I say that because I feel like art is like one of the main things that is an outlet for me. No matter what situation it is, sort of the protest that was happening, The thing that I did was made art, right? That was the comfort. Sort of Black people just losing their lives every day. I made art, right? And I consistently respond to that, and I feel like the world does too.
The juried art exhibit featuring Black artists at the Museum of Science and Industry runs until April 17th. And that's our show for this weekend. Please be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And though it might not feel like it yet, summer is approaching, so make sure to check out our new Chicago Summer Festival Guide while you're on our website. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. And join me and Paris Schutz next week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.